What is it?
Well, it's called a randomizer, and it's fitted to the guidance systems and operates under a very complex scientific principle called potluck. Now, no one knows where we're going. Not even the Black Guardian.
Not even us.
Hello and welcome to the Randomizer Podcast, Episode 4. I am Tim.
And I'm Charles.
As usual, we have a spoiler warning for the latest Doctor Who episode, although it probably won't be by the time you hear this. So we are spoiler warning for Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. And indeed, we're spoiler warning for all Doctor Who that preceded it.
And of course, a spoiler warning for our tangent.
Yes, we will be discussing Star Trek Picard. So if you haven't seen Episode 1 of Star Trek Picard, then spoiler warning. Also, a very specific spoiler warning for fans of the old Channel 5 soap opera Sunset Beach. We're never going to be discussing that.
Oh.
Okay, so Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. What did you make of it?
I really enjoyed this one. I do think that my love of Nikola Tesla influenced me liking the episode probably a little bit more than it deserved.
Do you love Nikola Tesla more or less than Nicola Sturgeon?
I think it's equal.
It was a nice historical, obviously still with the sci-fi element of the the Skithra.
Yeah.
That for me was the big thing about this episode. I was terribly distracted all the way through.
It was utterly ridiculous. I mean, I don't mind them sort of doing that design and its scorpions. Really, they should have just put in a thing like cousin to the arachnos or something. One line would have really just put all that nonsense to bed. They look good. The scorpions looked really, really good. The arachno, or whatever, as I say, it was slightly different. Not to the point where you could differentiate really that much.
Facially.
Yeah, facially. I mean, it was... And even the performance was very similar to Sarah Parrish.
That kind of tilted head and the sort of hissing and the teeth.
Interesting point was that the actress that portrayed the Queen was actually Rani from the Sarah Jane Adventures.
Okay. Haven't seen those, but would you recommend them?
Oh, God, yeah, they're so good. What I really liked about the Sarah Jane Adventures was that they were like classic Who. You know, they felt really sort of akin to that. And it's like, again, last week, what I was saying about Russell T Davies, you don't need to write children's TV badly. You know, you can write good stuff because they will understand it, and it was lovely. There was a few episodes that weren't brilliant, but whatever. But the only thing that got me about the whole thing was fandom. Again, fandom moaning about this, that, and the next thing, and I'm thinking, well, these are literally pitched at children. You have no real right to be criticising them for not being a bit more gritty or a bit this or that, you know? It's that usual thing with fandom of ownership and... Entitlement, that's the word.
Back to Nikola Tesla then. Yeah. So, great performances from the guests, I thought. Wasn't an overcrowded one like Orphan 55, so you could actually develop the characters a wee bit.
I mean, it was 100% improvement from last week's bloody car. Right?
Oh, it was good fun. And I thought Philip Glenister, who played Edison, is that right?
Yeah, he was really good, although I would say that when it was set, Edison was only in his 30s.
That is strange.
A little bit weird, but never mind.
But he reminded me actually of, I could say Josiah Bartlett from West Wing, who's that, Martin Sheen?
Yeah.
But facially, and I think obviously playing an American. Not his first appearance in Doctor Who?
No, of course. He was in Caves of Androzani as Salatine? Salatine, that's it.
Salad Team? I don't know. So I did find some of the model shots or the CG shots a bit ropey, like the Wardenclyffe establishing shot just looked a bit fake for some reason I couldn't put my finger on. It was only on screen for a second or two. And the rest of it, generally, I think this new series has been looking very cinematic, very nicely done.
Yeah, sometimes, but I do think that the designers, some of it seems very, very cheap, but this episode particularly looked good. The writer obviously knew her stuff. She'd done her research on Tesla. Few things that were paved over, but I didn't really expect them to be talking about it on a family show. I mean, as much as I love Tesla, I have to admit that there are things about him that were definitely off. Like, for example, he was a fan of eugenics. which obviously is not a particularly pleasant subject, but he was a great believer in it.
I think the relationship between Tesla and Edison is fairly accurately depicted from what I know about it. And Edison was certainly no stranger to acquiring other people's patents and exploiting them himself. And indeed, I think, ruthlessly did so throughout his whole career.
Very much. I mean, my opinion of Edison is he was a complete bastard and he stole the future from humanity. An interesting thing that was pointed out to me by my son, which I kind of feel a bit embarrassed that I completely missed this. The aliens, the Skithra, were basically a representation of Edison. As they were acquiring technologies that weren't theirs and exploiting them, etc. So, well done, Connor.
So they're scavenging technology from other species rather than making their own breakthroughs. Yeah. And this is a sort of analogy to Edison. And, full marks to showing the Chibnall era for making a point with subtlety.
Absolutely. Well, who'd have thought that was possible?
Also, I think the costume of the Skithra Queen was sort of made of kind of reconstituted elements, and only after the fact did I kind of appreciate some of that design work. Yeah. But it does seem odd, I don't think it can be laziness. I don't think it can be accidental necessarily, but coming hard on the heels of the similarity between the dregs and the Hoiks, to then have a creature which everybody glimpsed in the season preview and was convinced was the Rachnos, then turn up and not only not be the Rachnos, but have no mention of any connection made. And I don't think you want to be grinding the show to a halt to tick off the continuity boxes.
Tiny throwaway line.
But it actually threw me out of the episode a bit. I was just constantly going, well, what's the Rachnos connection?
Yeah.
To the detriment of my actually relaxing and enjoying a pretty damn good episode, I thought.
You see, I was watching it and I was enjoying it, but the enjoyment for me was spoiled only by myself, because I was watching it thinking, this is quite good.
Don't drop the
Please
ball.
don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
That's my own fault. But I was so sort of pissed off with last week's, and I really don't want to feel that way, because I want to just watch it and enjoy it, but I don't want this creeping thing at the back of my head saying it's going to be shit, because that's not fair to the programme, and it's not fair to myself. There was a couple of little things throughout this episode that I did think were slightly jarring. There's basically a scene where they're suddenly on the train. Now, they walk through a door, then you see a train that's already in movement, then you see them walking through the train door. Now, it was so bloody jarring. It just felt so clunky. It just didn't flow that well for me.
It was a strange one. I did notice it, but I wasn't bothered by it. It just felt like a dramatic kind of illusion of time and space. So they're in Niagara Falls originally. Hello to our listeners in Niagara Falls. And then suddenly they're on a train, which Graham made a passing reference to the Orient Express, but I don't think it's meant to be the Orient Express, not known to run to Niagara Falls, to the best of my knowledge. But you're right. Suddenly this train is hurtling through the night and it's as if they've barely drawn breath.
It was interesting because Yaz had something to do this episode.
Hallelujah.
She was actually very good.
Yes.
Graham didn't really have much to do this episode. Ryan, as always, basically just felt like a chair that somebody was pointing a bloody camcorder at.
Ouch.
It's just becoming very boring,
He's
to be honest.
shrinking on you, is he?
Shrinking very much. But I actually think that to have the Doctor and Yaz, or the Dr. Graham and Yaz, I think that dynamic would work so much better, because then they'd obviously have more for them to do. 3 is far too many. I mean, you only need to look at the classic series, look at the likes of Kinda. They sent 2 companions to sleep in that episode. One was doing something in her dream, but the other one literally was sent to bed.
It's very difficult to make it work.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because I genuinely think that the actress that plays Yaz is a much better actress than she's been given credit for. I definitely think she's stronger than Tosin Cole, and if the internet thing is to be believed, Tosin Cole has got a lead in a new American series, so I think we'll probably be losing him.
Oh, like you say, maybe it'll give the remaining companions a bit more scope. It's a question, because obviously it's been a deliberate choice to have 3 companions, to have a full family in the TARDIS in that sense, and so
I can understand them trying it. I just don't think it works.
It taxes a writer, and in Orphan 55, when there were so many guest cast, we really saw the kind of effects of that. Yeah, with Graham this week, I thought he was just kind of reduced to having a few wisecracks, and they didn't land so well as the stuff in Orphan 55. I found the humour in that really sharp, actually. My ideal episode with this setup would be that kind of sharpness of the kind of humour with a more dramatic episode, the way that we had some decent action and a lovely historical sort of setting for Nikola Tesla.
I think you're right there. The humour wasn't particularly brilliant. I think this episode was rattling along quite well, so it didn't feel as forced or anything. It was really nice when the Doctor was talking to Tesla, because, you know, there was that sort of the two inventors thing and the hope for humanity, etc. Also interesting when they were about to fight the Skithra, Arachnos, whatever. It felt a bit like one of those points in a heist movie where they start to describe the plot, you know, and it's like split screen and all that sort of Ocean's 11 type thing.
Yeah, you get this job, you get that job,
Yeah,
off you
that
go.
sort of thing.
Team montage. Did you get any kind of chemistry between the Doctor and Tesla there? I wasn't sure if it was all from Tesla's side, I think.
Yeah, I thought they were quite good. You know, they bounced off each other quite well. The other nice point was, and some people would say again, it's a bit of a soapbox, but this time I didn't feel it as a soapbox. At the end, when she's talking to Yaz and saying about how history will go, I do this, but I think a lot of people are jumping on these things as preachy soapbox, but that particular one I felt was very reminiscent of The Unquiet Dead, where Eccleston's Doctor's telling Billy Piper about Charles Dickens, he'll die, etc. But the novels and everything lives on. And I felt it was very, very similar to that, but not in a blatantly copying way. It was just very nice.
Actually, the pace of it, the delivery of it was all really good. And it shares with the Dickens thing that sense of the series communicating the unhappy ending in a nice way, in a humane and well-written way. And I think this was worlds apart from the ending of Orphan 55. You know, not tacked on. It was a natural bit of closure for this character that we've got to know and wanting naturally to know more about their future. So in terms of old school Hartnell historical, it's ticking the educational box to a large degree as well, I think.
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. A definite step in the right direction. Keep this up and I will be happy.
So one more thing I noticed was nobody got their minds non-consensually wiped this time, which seems a little inconsistent.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a really weird thing. I mean, I think that was probably the most jarring part of the episode. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, to allow them to have seen all those things, especially things like the TARDIS, and not mind wipe them? What the? I can understand if you do a story that contradicts the Sunmakers. You know, that's like 30, 40 years ago. That doesn't really matter, but you can't contradict your own bloody continuity 2 episodes later. I mean, that is absolute nonsense.
I would rather have no mind wiping though, because it's absolutely a trap. You know, the moment you start having to do that to tidy up any potential historical damage, then that's the last scene of every episode.
Exactly. I mean, do you remember, what was it, Mark of the Rani, with Stevenson's rocket? You know, Colin Baker even makes the joke at the end, I bet it'll go like a rocket, Stephen. You know. The point is that plenty of historical figures have met the Doctor.
Yep.
I agree with you. I think it was terrible that they did wipe Ada's mind, etc., you know, in Spyfall.
It's just very strange and feels clumsy. Maybe there's a payoff coming. We'll have to wait and see.
We must ask the Doctor.
It is time to hear from our very own scientific advisor. This week, I wanted to ask about the gift of the TARDIS, the capacity for the Doctor and his or her companions to understand any language and to be understood wherever they travel. So, welcome, Dr. Schultz. As machine learning advances and the speed of real-time translation increases, do you think we're near to seeing a practical universal translator? Something that works so invisibly that it seems as if everyone is just speaking in their native language?
Well, of course, this is completely implausible.
Thank you, Dr. Schultz, for, once again, your fantastic insights.
A man is the sum of his memories, you know, a Time Lord even more so.
So last time we picked The Curse of the Black Spot. We have since both rewatched it, actually had the enjoyable experience of watching it together, didn't we, matey?
Gar, we did.
So it was Stephen Moffat, again, with this simple idea made terrifying. One cut, one tiny injury could be deadly. You would be marked with the black spot, and then this creature, this siren, would rise out of the depths and kill you or vaporize you or whatever. And I don't think I can do this accent for the whole piece.
Oh, thank fuck. Yeah, she was a scurvy dog.
That's Matt Smith's girlfriend you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Apologies to Matt Smith, because obviously he's listening. A total romp. Yeah, basically. Amy Pond was hilarious. I love the fact that when she goes to rescue the Doctor who's walking the plank to his obvious enjoyment, she, instead of just taking the cutlass, she takes the whole outfit.
Yeah, she pauses and takes the outfit.
Goes for the whole outfit.
And that's what marks it out as a romp, I think.
Yeah.
It's pure dramatic terms. It's a race against time. She's got to grab a weapon and get back and save the Doctor. But she sees the outfit. We have that shot of it, and you see her eyebrow go up, and you're like, oh yeah. Great fun.
The thing as well, especially with the plank, I think kind of proves a point I was making last time about Robots of Sherwood. How he was so into it.
He was trying to be all piratey.
Capaldi would have been just arguing about the nonsense of it. He was getting into it. He was loving the whole thing. I mean, the first thing he said was, yo ho ho! Oh, do we not say that?
Yeah, brilliant.
It's that sort of Matt Smith ultra enthusiasm. I mean, he's like a puppy. He's getting overexcited about things, and it comes in every Matt Smith story. I mean, that's why the guy is so lovable and so watchable.
Yeah, and I think it gives great opportunities for the companions as well. You got Rory and Amy in the background, kind of just with their expressions aghast as he's sort of saying this stuff. And then, actually, even though it's rompy, the episode does get nicely creepy from time to time. I think, as the Doctor and the Captain have to leave the safety of the room they're barricaded in, we were both aware the atmosphere was really, really tense. And yet, when the storm is lashing and the Captain's shouting all the instructions and Rory takes the time to say, he's making half of this stuff up, it still has those sort of rompy notes which are so enjoyable to watch.
It was very creepy, and again, it's that Stephen Moffat thing, like you pointed out, of something so innocuous, like one cut, one tiny little pinprick could kill you.
This time it's used to great comic purposes, because it means when Amy does leap up brandishing the sword, the pirates are all backing away in terror, and Karen Gillan plays it beautifully, where she's like, oh hey, this is working, I can carry this off, not knowing that one little nick would be enough.
It was also interesting that the siren being able to appear in a mirrored surface. That was quite a clever little one, although I did point out when we were watching it, what about the eyes?
I think it's later specified it had to be a flat surface.
Yeah.
But it's quite a convenient conceit that suddenly all the flat reflective surfaces are not used until they've had time to smash a bunch of them. But it's nice. The Doctor's wrong a hell of a lot in this episode.
Yeah, he is, actually. Also, I thought Hugh Bonneville was wonderful in this, and there was some really nice scenes between him and his son and his regrets. His inability to give up the treasure led to what he perceived to be the death of his son. So, there was some rather nice little moments in it. I mean, again, it was a romp, but it had a nice balance between the sort of the fun, the scary, and the sad.
Had some heart and a nice performance from the child performer too.
Yeah, he was very good.
Yeah, and again, it's another Stephen Moffat Nobody Dies story, actually. At the end, everybody's there, and you get all these suspiciously clean-looking pirates joining Avery and his son on the bridge of the medical ship at the end. It does share a lot thematically and even plot-wise with Empty Child Dr. Dances, with the kind of medical ship healing people in a blunt and unintelligent way that causes more problems initially until the Doctor can unravel it all. Despite the sort of self-plagiarism of it, I think it's great fun. Doesn't really chain into any of the larger themes of the series, I think.
No, I think this one's more of a standalone, and talking of self-plagiarism, you're talking about the ultimate self-plagiarist, of course, Stephen Moffat. But I genuinely don't care about that. It's so fun, it's so enjoyable.
A really fun story. Arr.
Yeah, I'm sure we have an accord on that.
Why are pirates called pirates?
Go on.
Because they are.
Yeah, okay, please cut that.
Look, when I give the word, press the button. The big one? Yes, maybe it works in conjunction with the others.
So, time once again to press the button on the randomizer and choose a new story. We're hoping for old series this time. Let's see what we get.
All right, well, let's try and find out. Now, what could it be?
The Rings of Akaten, still new series.
That's actually great, because I love this story.
Not so fond of it, actually.
Well, actually, this one was one of those stories that sort of got a lot of hate at the time, I think. But I absolutely adore this story. I think the music in it, I absolutely love. It felt different from most Doctor Who stories, I think mainly because it was based around the music. Yeah, I mean, it's a very simplistic plot. There's not a lot particularly going on and stuff, but it felt very alien. It felt a lovely way to introduce Clara to the alienness of the Doctor's world, and that speech, oh my god.
Now, which speech?
The speech where he is talking to the god and saying, you know, I've seen worlds come, I've seen a universe designed by the laws of a madman, and you know, referencing Omega, etc.
I suspect I like that speech. I don't recall it in detail, and it will be very interesting to rewatch this one and see if and why I was so kind of down on it. And I wasn't hating it at all. I just was ungripped by it and slightly unmoved by it, I think.
I was in Glasgow last weekend with our friends David and Izzy, and funny enough, they'd not long watched it because they were going through a Matt Smith rewatch. We watched Cold War and Hyde, I think it was, the one that came after it. So I'd only just missed out, and we were all discussing Akatan, and they were just saying how much they loved it as well.
Great. So, well, we look forward to the rewatch, and I do look forward to seeing it again because I want to give it another chance and analyse why I might have been less keen on it in the first place.
Neil Cross wrote it, who wrote Hyde.
Right.
And he also created Luther, the TV show.
I haven't seen Luther.
It's a very good police procedural, very high on drama. But Neil Cross is obviously quite a massive genre fan, because in the first episode of Luther, you see that the police station is actually on Hobbs Lane, which is Quatermass. So
very nice. Quatermass, for those who don't know, is a 1950s, I think, Doctor Who precursor in many ways. Nigel Neal wrote it, and there were various versions of it, but the most accessible one is probably Quatermass in the Pit.
There's also they did the movie of it as well with Andrew Keir, who was in the Dalek invasion of Earth.
I'm pretty sure it's either on iPlayer or BritBox, the Quatermass in the Pit.
It's on iPlayer, I know that.
So go watch it sooner than later.
It's very, very good.
Yeah, very, very atmospheric, creepy. It's just lovely. There are Quatermass references in Doctor Who, especially in Remembrance of the Daleks.
Yeah, which is very ironic because Nigel Neal hated Doctor Who.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
I accept your challenge.
There's a sporting gentleman.
So, welcome to the challenge section of the show. Now, last week it was Challenge Chaz. This week, Chaz will be thinking of a challenge for me. But first, it's time for him to report back. So, you finally watched The Mutants.
Basically, what happened was I got myself all prepared. I got my Doritos, my Pepsi Max, you know, sort of comfy bit on the sofa, etc.
Are we doing product placement now?
Well, Pepsi Max sponsors everything I do. Got myself on the sofa, got BritBox all ready, you know, so just about to start there, and sort of, you know, I had a little alert on Twitter and I'm looking through, and somebody had been posting about tofu, and I got so engrossed that I ended up in a flame war about tofu that lasted about 4 hours. So by the time that I'd finished, I kind of fell asleep.
4-hour tofu flame war.
Yeah.
You get it for next time?
Probably.
Okay. No, come on. Let's do it. Commit.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll
so
go
next
balls
time
deep.
we'll hear about Chaz's thoughts on the Mutants, finally. And then we'll move on to my challenge. Okay.
These corridors all look the same.
So, welcome back to Which Corridor Is This?, which discusses my rewatch of Doctor Who, and it seems that in running through the corridors I've managed to grab Chaz's hand and drag him along with me, because as we both start discussing Face of Evil, you've gone back and rewatched it, haven't you?
I have actually. I found I really enjoyed it. I won't say too much about it, but I really enjoyed it. I loved Leela, I loved the plot, some great performances, great to see Michael Wisher, nice ending, great fun. But the interesting thing is that when it finished, I was watching BritBox, and then it just jumps onto the next episode. And I sort of stayed along for the ride for Robots of Death.
Which I've also just finished rewatching, and possibly more than any other Doctor Who story, I've seen Robots of Death so many times, partly because it was one of the first to be released on VHS, and it's also amazing. It's one of the best stories ever, I would say.
I totally agree. I had an absolute bloody blast watching this. What I found was that when I'd watched Face of Evil, I did enjoy it, but it took me a little bit of time to get into it. But my God, within minutes, I was invested in Robots of Death. Leela, Louise Jameson, is absolutely brilliant. There's some beautiful little moments about, her noticing body language, etc.
Yes.
And Tom Baker comes up with that wonderful line about the inverse ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. The cast, everybody in the cast is fantastic, especially Russell Hunter and Pamela Salem. Just an absolute bloody joy. And the design, oh my God, it's a beautiful episode.
Sort of iconic Art Deco robots, and the spaceship reflects that world, the costumes and the makeup on the cast. There's hardly a wrong note with it. I mean, for me, it feels like an old friend now, almost to settle in with. And although, as it was coming up, I was like, oh, I've seen this so many times. And I was like, no, I'm going to watch it anyway. And, I just was sucked in it, right, all over again. I did notice for the first time, I think I would say, okay, 2 flaws. Don't hate me. The first is very trivial. It's just a very silly boing sound effect when Leela throws her knife into one of the robots. And that's fine. You make up for that with lines like, please do not throw hands at me.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah. The other one was a bit more serious, I thought, which was the tension of the threat to the Doctor and Leela when they're down in the scoops when they first arrived. Seems to be kind of diffused because we already know Ivanov has given the order to shut down before they realise that they're in danger, and that seemed like an odd editing choice. I'm not sure if you could have recut that to preserve that.
Now you mention it, I remember watching that scene at the time and thinking it doesn't flow because we know there's no tension in the actual reveal, but one little tiny bit,
I mean, it must have taken me...
It doesn't ruin it in any way, shape or form.
It must have taken me 10 watches or more before I even begun to notice that, and it's a strange little quirk in an otherwise brilliantly made piece of television.
I think the interesting thing is we're rewatching anything at the moment, we're looking at things because we know we're going to talk about them. We're concentrating probably a little bit more than we would
must
normally.
Find something to say.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true, and it's especially with the new episodes, I think it's a danger I want to try and fight against internally so that you're actually just enjoying the show.
Concentrate on the second watch.
Yeah. Well, I'm finding I'm not often having time for a second watch. I've only had time to watch Nikola Tesla once, partly because of my crowded rewatching schedule for other elements of the podcast. But I think it also is the fact that what I've really enjoyed about New Who is watching it not as a fan anymore, but just staying away from the internet by and large beforehand, so that I've certainly not got any major spoilers, but also so that when I watch it, I'm just saying, entertain me, be a nice piece of television, be this show that I loved as a child, and a new twist on it, and seeing where that takes me. And of course you can't detach entirely from that, but I think a lot of the enjoyment is to just give it its first outing cold, without any kind of expectations or without any kind of foreknowledge, certainly.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I don't know if it was partly last week my own worry about it, or sort of the thought of having something to say about it. That little thing in my head, but I do just want to watch it and enjoy it and then rewatch it or talk about it critically at a later date. I want to sort of, try and absorb the episode first. Getting back to robots, the other thing about it is it really denotes the society is all about opulence and luxury. They feel like a very lazy society because everything is done for them and everything has got aesthetic, beauty to it. It's a bit ancient Rome. I get the sort of feeling that at home they'd be lying on the chaise lawns being fed grapes by the robots, etc.
It's interesting to speculate whether there's any other form of work in that society. I mean, obviously these people are out on the sand miner to mine for the lucrative minerals, and notice the coincidence with lucanol and lucrative. Again, that probably took me about 20 watches before I clocked that one. But Chris Boucher's script is sharp. It's got some beautiful lines in it, which I think also feed through into his work on Blake 7. So you have lines like Ivanov saying, "Where's that power? It's coming, sir. So is old age." Yeah. And I love that line.
Yeah, it's very good. Russell Hunter, of course, is absolutely amazing. One thing I will say about the whole society is that we're doing this speculation, but of course, Big Finish have done a spin-off of robots called Caldor City. Now, I've never listened to any of it, so they could have interpreted things completely differently, which I'm sure they probably have. So don't at us, don't shout at us. We don't know anything about Caldor City. We're just basically speculating from the original source.
We're in the canon, damn it.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to hear those big finishes. There's so many of those, it's hard to know where to start. I'm going to name drop for a moment, because when I was quite young, I had the real pleasure of working with Russell Hunter. I work in the theatre, but at this stage I was performing as an actor. I was an extra in a play in Glasgow called The Big Picnic, and Russell Hunter was written into a role for that, and he was just the sweetest, kindest man. And at that time I was resitting an exam for university, and he took the time to talk to me about the topic of the exam, and I swear actually helped me with the result. Just really generous, really kind, and a lot of the professional cast were a little more aloof from the supporting cast in that production, so it was a real pleasure to have somebody just sort of share his time with you and talk to you, and I just feel very honoured to have met the man.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that, because I met him as well, funny enough, but mine was of course mine of course was a more sort of Doctor Who related thing. I think it was GalaxyCon, I think back in the 90s convention, and obviously he was there as a guest, etc. But what got me about him was he was so down to earth, and his love of Doctor Who was really immense. He was talking about Hartnell era, he was talking about how he would love to see the shows still made in black and white, and just, about the lighting choices and everything. He came across as a really genuine, lovely guy with a great interest in the way these things are produced and the concepts behind them.
And Ivanov goes from being chief suspect, really, in many ways, to having a sort of renaissance, and I think there's such glee in those last sort of scenes with him and Toos sneaking around sticking bombs onto the robots.
Yeah, that actually was very funny. They were obviously a great little double act, but there was one little scene in it which I thought really sort of showed the underlying compassion of the character, was when they were talking about Zelda's brother, who had robophobia, and everybody till that point, it had been basically implied that he had killed the brother, etc. And it turns out that he was trying to save the guy had robophobia, but the father had it hushed up because he was embarrassed by his son, etc. So it basically gave this character a bad reputation, as it were. And it turns out
great
it
writing.
was completely unjustified.
Great performance of great writing, because the richness of the characterization just spins around. Everything you think you knew takes a twist. They've got well established kind of bickering about Zelda's being one of the founding families, and Ivanov obviously resenting this, and he reads up until this moment as a ruthless, profit-driven captain of the sand miner, and we hear about these accusations. There's nothing to really make us question that he would prioritize a person over profit until that scene. So that's why it's such a good story, is that there is such depth, and it has a kind of elegance to how it reveals those twists as well.
I do feel every character's fleshed out quite well. Poole is another great character, because
David Cullings, right?
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful David Cullings. He's a 70s staple. He's a bit like David Warner in a lot of ways. He was the investigator, and was really interested in the way that Leela sussed him out immediately. That was another great use of Leela, giving her other traits to her personalities. Yeah, it was a great little thing between him and D84, which was another beautiful little performance. Those sing-song voices, they made them so not threatening. It was a sort of journey into Uncanny Valley territory, because Tom Baker was saying about the static faces, etc. And it was before The Walking Dead, and it was before that whole discussion as we are now having about, for example, CGI characters, etc. And we're obviously stepping closer to the idea of automatons and robots.
I'm not sure when Uncanny Valley was coined as a term, but I suspect these were still, active discussions in robotics and the representation of humans as in robotic form. And Boucher's obviously picked up on some of this and seeded it into the script. I also noticed this time especially how clever and how perfect a fit for this story Leela is as a companion, because her character as a sort of instinctive hunter is immediately useful and edgy and perceptive in this very formalized world, and when somebody's not what they seem, she's right on top of it, pointing out that Poole moves like a hunter.
There's also some great little comic turns from her as well. I mean, for example, the bit where she's interviewing D84, she turns round in the chair, you know, she's obviously trying to feel very important. It's just absolutely adorable.
Well, the yo-yo scene right at the top.
Yeah,
and
of course.
the boxes in the
that,
TARDIS.
I mean, that's one of the best descriptions of the TARDIS I've ever seen as well. You know, I love her. That's silly.
She's not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, she's so much more intelligent than you sort of are led to believe. She's razor sharp.
I'm not sure if later scripts, I'll find out, I'm not sure if later scripts go on to forget that fact, but I think this is often the trajectory with Doctor Who companions, particularly in Old Who, where they're introduced with a lot of great character points and everything's well fleshed out, and their initial story or stories make great use of this, but then of course new writers come along and they become the person who has to get into trouble and ask silly questions. But I'll hope for better for Leela, although with a little bit of foreknowledge, I suspect it's not always going to be the case. But again, one of the joys of doing this rewatch is that we can see how this development continues or discontinues as we go. So we'll look forward to more of that.
Predictable as ever, Doctor.
Time for Doctor by Doctor, where we've been randomly selecting a doctor and then talking about their era. Now, so far we've done Jodie Whittaker and Peter Capaldi. So the random number generator is set from 1 to 11, and I'm going to click the button, and here's hoping we don't get 11, because this would be a little less random than we hope. 8! Wow, well, there's not a huge amount of canon here to talk about, but Paul McGann, the 8th Doctor, and certainly there's plenty to talk about in terms of what his era represented for the show. It's the stepping stone between classic and new Who.
Absolutely.
The TV movie, it's sometimes called The Enemy Within, which was a working title, released in 1996. And at the time I was at university, I was performing in student plays, and one of the people I was working with was another ardent Doctor Who fan, so we actually had the first night of a show which we were both involved in, and then rushed back clutching the VHS tape which we bought to watch it that night.
That VHS was actually released 2 weeks before the broadcast.
Was it now?
Yep.
Oh, I'd forgotten that. And I think it was broadcast in the States the day before in Britain.
I think so, yeah.
It was before, but I'm not sure how much. Paul McGann was a great choice of actor. I think that was a very satisfying choice to make. And his subsequent work for Big Finish and in other places has more than sort of confirmed that he's a doctor in his own right and a unique doctor. It was lovely to see the Night of the Doctor in the 50th anniversary year sort of round out his era and give some sort of canonical reference, if you like, to some of his Big Finish companions too.
Absolutely.
I've listened to quite a lot of the Paul McGann stories on Big Finish, especially the earlier ones with Charlie Pollard and then Chris, and some of the Lucy Miller stuff and Mary Shelley recently as well. So there's a well-rounded out, wider universe for Paul McGann's 8th Doctor, but I think we'll talk mainly about what we thought of this television movie.
Yeah, the first choice, I believe, or one of the choices to play the Doctor was Liam Cunningham from Game of Thrones, Sir Davos. I mean, I'm very happy with Paul McGann. He's wonderful. He's very sort of much the adventurer. He comes across as a sort of Horatio Hornblower type. I think, in fact, he was probably some of that in the script anyway. He's very sort of much the dashing hero.
Yeah.
You know?
There was sort of several innovations made, some more contentious than others, one of which was the Doctor having a proper romantic kiss with a companion for the first time. It seems old hat nowadays, but this was scandalous and shocking at the time, and seen as very American in a slightly snooty way by a lot of British fans, I think. But I remember after we finished watching the VHS that night, my pal and I turned to each other and we were just like, well, you know, for every kind of vehicle chase there was the Doctor thumping the TARDIS console, so there were all these lovely elements that balanced out some of the stuff that had been crowbarred in. Because I think on reflection, it's not that it was made by an American company and therefore very Americanized. I think it was made by a British company with American involvement, and they made it in the way they thought American television would work.
Yeah.
It was sort of meant to be a pilot for a new series, and then there was a sort of uncertainty about whether anything would ever happen. And so there were kind of car chases, but, a motorbike chase, I think, at one point. But then there's moments in that script which are pure Doctor Who. You know, the cop confronts the Doctor, he grabs the gun and he points it at himself. You know, those moments just sing out as being what makes this show largely unique and brilliant.
I thought that they were a little bit heavy-handed with because it was a pilot, they were trying to over-explain everything. I mean, you look at that and you look at Rose and the way that RTD done it. You don't swamp your audience with tons and tons of exposition and continuity. Paul McGann does a speech at the start about, you know, the Daleks and the Time Lords.
And it doesn't sort of see itself through much. Certainly the Daleks are just a plot device to eliminate the Master. I mean, you needed to introduce the Master, obviously, to set him up as the returning enemy.
RTD took, I think, 3 years before he mentioned Gallifrey, for example. But that was wonderful because I loved that slow seeding process.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it just felt like a lot of info dump at once. Doesn't take away from how lovely it looked and how great the performances were. You know, I mean, Paul McGann, of course, absolutely wonderful. The woman playing Grace,
Daphne Ashbrook.
that's it. She was great, actually. I really liked her, and even the young kid, Chang Li, thought he was good. Eric Roberts did a passable Master.
Eric Roberts is your staple B-movie bad guy in so many bad films, and I'm almost a fan because he is so kind of over the top and scenery chewing, and that's not inconsistent, shall we say,
with the Master.
With the Ainley Master, certainly. And, well, maybe we're seeing this with Sim and Sacha Dhawan as well, but I think Eric Roberts' kind of presence and personality were certainly on the camp side for the villain, but he does serve it very well.
The scene where he's...
I like to dress for the occasion.
Yeah, and he's with his wife, for example, when he suddenly becomes... It's funny and it's chilling because they actually took the sound effect out when you see him crack her neck, which is quite gruesome. But also, you know, my name is not Honey, Master won't... And, of course, when he's asking where the body was and he's throwing fingernails away.
Yes.
There's some very, very interesting little choices there, but very funny.
A few wrong notes, I think, in terms of the morgue attendant's sort of comedy feint is a bit poor. But also, I don't know if I like this or not. There's the scene of him watching Frankenstein as the Doctor regenerates, and it's something I feel has been done a lot. I'm not sure if it had been done a lot in 1996, but the sort of intercutting Frankenstein with something coming back to life, I'm sure I've seen in other places, but you know, it was fun. It's alive. And the regeneration, I thought at the time it was just lovely that they brought Sylvester McCoy back so he could have a proper farewell and he wasn't kind of Colin Bakered out of the series.
Yeah, probably, but I think in terms of how the series was to work, it would have probably been better just starting with Paul McGann.
Yeah, in terms of the
you could have always done that in a flashback at some point, you know, had it went to series.
Yeah, fair enough. But I think you needed to have the Doctor as a new man and discovering himself, and actually that motivates the kiss.
Very true.
And I know who I am, these shoes fit perfectly. Those little moments are bought by having had the backstory of him being a different Doctor. And yeah, I think you're right that it does eat up screen time and use a lot of your available kind of narrative, if you like, to do that. So, you know, a good chunk of the story is just the Doctor working out who he is again and getting on with things. And then, actually, if it was just the confrontation with the Master, then you'd have a very short film.
Interesting thing is that Sylvester McCoy, I think, only has about 4 words in it. It's almost like he's an extra. It's very good, and he looks good. And I did like the costume, which was actually a really nice choice.
A brutal death as well, you know, just gunfire down. You know?
Yeah, had the series going on, they were going to introduce other elements. I think they may have introduced older Doctors at some point. But one of the things was when the Doctor's mentioning Gallifrey, etc., and he talks about his father, apparently his father was going to be Ulysses.
The mythological character.
Yeah, or
not the
Gallifrey
space Ulysses, because there wasn't an
Ulysses 31.
That's right, yeah.
I think it was a sort of space take on the mythology.
So I think I speak for the rest of the world here when I say what the fuck.
Yeah. well, I don't really know much about the Ulysses myth. I think it's
The last thing that show needed was more mythology.
yeah, it was somebody had to journey into the underworld or something along those lines. But anyway, that would have been who the Doctor's father was, etc. And I think this whole half-human thing started as well.
I think, the kiss you could take or leave in itself, it was definitely unprecedented in terms of the Doctor as a romantic figure. That was the first of that. But, in the moment of his reawakening as himself, it was a beautiful moment within the show. But the half-human thing felt very odd. It was like another layer thrown in, partly as the plot device so that the TARDIS would respond to Chang Li and the Master get in there. But also, I don't know, it felt like it needed to up the stakes in a way that they didn't need upped.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're throwing too many elements into the mix. I think what their idea was, we need some sort of mystery, but it was inserted badly because, the Doctor suddenly came out, I'm half human.
I think they cut the line, just like Mr. Spock.
Yeah, I suppose it's that sort of the execs feel, they can't relate to this guy who's alien, so we have to give him something,
Yeah, I honestly don't know if that's what was motivating it, or if that's just a kind of quite Anglo-centric assumption about what might have motivated it in an American co-production. But it does feel odd, and I don't know if anything ever came of it, really. I'm trying to think if there's any further references to it.
The hybrid?
The hybrid.
I think there was a few references throughout as a sort of joke.
That was the Paul McGann TV movie, and his other appearance in Night of the Doctor, I think, was the only other official time, and this itself was a kind of mini episode.
Yeah, I mean, basically the only on-screen stuff is, like you say, TV movie, Night of the Doctor. Of course, he sort of branched off into a lot of Big Finish. In fact, he dominated Big Finish.
I think it was a big sort of name to bring in, and it was so lovely. I think Big Finish have served both the 8th Doctor and the 6th Doctor so well in giving those actors the chance to work with more scripts and a wider range of possibility than they were allowed on screen.
Without a doubt, you had some absolutely stonking stories with Paul McGann. Unfortunately, my Big Finish memory isn't so great because I haven't listened to a lot of them in such a long time. I do remember things like The Chimes of Midnight, which I just think is such a wonderful piece of drama.
Great story.
Absolutely creepy and wonderful. Charlie and the Doctor, perfectly done together. Of course, that all started in Storm Warning, which is a really nice reintroduction to the character. My son's more into a lot of these. He's sort of introduced me to things like Doom Coalition, where Paul McGann's Doctor is up against a rival Time Lord called the 11.
You mentioned him, played by Mark Bonner.
Yeah.
Who we talked about in The Rebel Flesh.
Very clever idea. I used to be an avid listener to Big Finish, and I still highly regard them. It's just, I think, because it's on screen, I just don't really bother as much, and maybe, I will dip my toe back in.
I collected the Big Finish releases from the early days and enjoyed them immensely. I think I've heard about the first 160 or so. Some of the spin-off series as well. The Dalek War series was very good. Dalek Empire, I think it was called.
I did like I Davros.
Yes.
That was wonderful.
There's lots and lots to explore out there. If anybody listening is new to Big Finish, would recommend diving in, although it's a big pool.
Yeah.
Could it have been affected by tangential deviation coming out of the warp ellipse?
So for Tangent of the Week, we thought we would talk about the new series that just started on Amazon Prime, which is Star Trek Picard. And this is a well-anticipated return for Patrick Stewart playing Jean-Luc Picard. It's being released on Fridays. There's just one episode out so far, and both of us have watched it. So, what did you make of it?
I've really enjoyed it. Very nostalgia-heavy, the first episode. You had quite a lot of references to the past, and I believe that you will get some, more through the season. I don't have any problem with that. It starts beautifully. It starts with, I think it was a Cole Porter song or something, that Data had actually sung at Troy and Riker's wedding in Nemesis. And you get this beautiful spacescape, and then you get this absolutely gorgeous image of the Enterprise D. They've obviously done the new model, and it just looks fantastic. And you have a scene immediately of Data and Picard playing poker, which is exactly where Next Generation left off in the TV series. So that's a really nice little callback. And you see that he's now retired to his vineyard in France. He has a dog called Number One.
That was
nice
funny.
little fun thing.
Clarify for me, because I wanted to go back and watch the last of the movies, which was Nemesis, was it?
Yeah, Data did die, as it
remember
were,
that.
in Nemesis, but there was a replacement called B4.
But he's pulled
He's
out
an
the drawer. and
inferior version.
I think the
of-
movie ended on that note of
Yeah.
hope that Data lived on through this one.
Yeah.
But that clearly came to nothing. There's a sense in which Picard could shape up to be, if you like, the search for Data, because it looks like recovering Data's lost memory patterns seems to be a thread that's
Yeah.
being laid down.
It does actually go quite heavily into continuity, I think, because you even reference Commander Bruce Maddox, who was in a season 2 story called The Measure of a Man. He was a robotics expert. He wanted to dismantle Data to study him, and
I
Picard
remember.
did a sort of courtroom thing about,
Yes.
human rights, etc.
Well, that's the major theme, isn't it? And it's Rebel Flesh all over again. This artificial life sentience question that
There's our
comes up.
tangent.
Yes, we have a link. Yeah, we decided we don't care if there's actually an explicit link to Doctor Who, but we'll talk about it anyway. Always helps if there is. So Data's been defended, and his right to exist and his sentience have been discussed in the programme before. And this was the antagonist, this Maddox character.
Yeah.
I thought Stewart was playing Picard very old, and I'm not sure if that's just because Patrick Stewart is very old himself now, but whether this elderly fragility is being overperformed a little so that he can be slightly reinvigorated when the series gets into the swing of things.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you. I do think it's deliberate. I think once he's on board, whatever ship it is that he's going to command or whatever, he's obviously going to sort of get a new lust for life. He's certainly doing a Logan. Patrick Stewart obviously played Professor X in the X-Men series. A couple of years ago, they did the sort of final Wolverine Hugh Jackman movie called Logan, and Patrick Stewart was obviously part of that, and he was playing Professor X. There'd been a major disaster in the past, and he had a sort of form of Alzheimer's, and it was such a touching, beautiful performance, because you could still see flashes of the old Professor X, but it was like the diminishment of his intellect and his fierce sort of knowledge. It was a very moving performance, and I think this is Picard, who's sort of, he's got regrets, he's got many regrets, and you can see that in the interview. He wants to atone, he feels he has to atone for his own sins, and I think this is giving him the opportunity, or this will give him the opportunity that he seeks.
I thought it was nicely balanced. It wasn't laid on too thick about the old, I've sat around regretting the past and now I'm going to go out and kick some ass or whatever, but that's there, but it's not laid on with spades. It seemed perfectly well pitched. It was engrossing first episode. If I was a little better versed in Star Trek lore, I would have probably found those references more satisfying and a bit less puzzling. But I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to watching the future episodes, and I think we can come back to Star Trek in future tangents of the week, because I happen to be reading a book which I found in a charity shop just now about the very origins of Star Trek. It's fair to say Gene Roddenberry's not coming out very well from this book, but it's got me watching some of the old original series again. The lighting and the colours in that are just amazing.
They pop, don't they?
Yeah,
They
I
really do
enjoy it.
pop.
I'm sure some of that is remastering, but also the version that I'm watching on Netflix has new Enterprise model shots and effects, and part of me's sad about that, because I would really love to just sort of appreciate the original work of the model makers and the special effects people, and I'm not sure if the unupgraded non-George Lucas versions are out there to be found still.
They are actually. I have the original series on Blu-ray, and you have the updated and the old, the way that the Doctor Who does as well, so you can watch either one you want.
Nice. There's a passing reference in this book I'm reading to them instructing the director of photography to just throw every primary colour they can at it and make it look really colourful, because what I hadn't realised at the time was this was part of the network portraying itself as the first full colour network. So I think it was NBC.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to do colour, you're going to make the most of it. So should put this side by side with Spearhead from Space at some point.
Yeah. I remember back in our days in the Glasgow group, we had a magazine called Paisley Pattern.
We did.
At the time, and there was a feature in one of them, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was the idea that if, for example, the Peter Cushing movie had been the only Doctor Who and it had been taken up as a series in America, and I always liked this idea, you know, how they used to do The Untouchables, starring blah, 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 a Desilu production, Doctor Who, a Desilu production, starring Peter Cushing as the Doctor.
Oh, it would have been Doctor Who.
Yeah.
No, it would be a really interesting other world. I think the other thing I hadn't realised was how closely side-by-side Mission Impossible and Star Trek had been created. They were literally in adjacent studios.
And, of course, Leonard Nimoy was in Mission Impossible.
Yeah. No, it's a great book. It's
His
called
other
Star
things.
Trek, The Real Story.
I do love classic Trek. I love most Trek, to be honest. I wasn't particularly enamoured with Discovery, especially season 1. Season 2 did pick up better because we had Pike and Spock, and I thought that was much better. An interesting little offshoot is they're doing these mini 10-minute episodes called Short Treks, which are sort of webisodes. They don't all fall from Discovery, which is interesting.
Oh, interesting.
The first one was Spock's first day on the Enterprise, where he's meeting number 1 and they're in a turbo lift and the lift breaks down and they're having this conversation and it's absolutely delightful.
Right. And it's just 10 minutes.
10 minutes. There is one, I haven't watched it yet, called Children of Mars, which is a prequel to Picard.
It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for.
9 times out of 10.
Thank you for listening. That was the Randomizer podcast. If you've any feedback, questions, or if you've crossed the void beyond the mind, then we can be reached at randomizerpodcast@gmail.com.
And please follow us on Twitter at RandomizerPod. In both cases, that's randomizer with an S, not a Z.
Well, that's everything for this time. Fuck's sake, DJ.